Welcome back to another video, Purple Political Talk here. Today we're going to be talking about the latest 2024 presidential election map. We're going to do an update to my prediction based on some of the most recent polls, different things going on, and be taking a look at who right now is in the lead for the White House. Let me tell you, as you're going to see through this prediction, I think things have definitely changed since, a couple of weeks ago, and right now we have a clear leader in the presidential race. But before we do begin, I want to remind you to like, subscribe, and to turn on the notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest 2024 election content. Now, without further ado, let's get started with the video. So, overall, I think that the last couple of weeks have been really defined by, the talks about Joe Biden, the talks about him possibly dropping out of the presidential race. And, those are talks that have been amplified within the halls of Congress this last week since they've come back. And, I think overall it's a sign that Joe Biden is weakened as a candidate. Now, do I think Joe Biden right now is going to stay on the ticket? If you would have asked me yesterday, I thought, or the day before, yes. After we've seen a couple of things happen as, more Congress members are starting to speak out, as we see, now more consistently, more Democrats coming out, and the George Clooney op-ed, which I think was really interesting considering, hey, George Clooney is a Obama ally, like almost best friends. So, all that really, begs the question, will Joe Biden end up, sticking on the ticket, amidst the mounting pressure? And I think at this point, it's not looking great. And it's not looking great for him in other fronts. And we're going to talk about that in this when we start talking about the swing states, in that generally speaking, it's looking ugly for Biden when it comes to winning in these swing states. If we look at a lot of swing state polls, I would go as far as saying right now, states like Texas, for example, where, you probably in the past could have seen, Biden getting within a couple points. I think right now you're talking probably a safe margin. In some other states like Ohio and Iowa, I think you're starting to get towards that conversation, but I think these are going to be a bit closer. But, right now on your screen, you're going to have the states that I think are going to be by a safe margin for either respective party. The states that are in gray are going to be in the likely column. One of the big things that stands out, the state of New York. I think right now the state of New York, as things stand today, could end up going in the likely column. Do I think it's going to be in the likely column by a lot? I think it's going to be marginally very close to being a safe state. But one of the very interesting things that, I was reading this past week, as we've been seeing a lot of the different talks about, Joe Biden and, the whole things regarding him dropping out, him not, there's been a lot of talk, especially about in some internal polling in the state of New York, where representatives have kind of come out, or we've seen news reports come out saying that in some of these districts, I think the ones I can think of the most are Mornaro's district, some of the districts that are, in this region of New York State, that, Biden carried these districts. Trump, he's they're underperforming massively. And, there's a lot of things when it comes to the city of New York that have been showing that maybe it's going to be a closer. I don't really think Donald Trump has a realistic chance of winning the city of New York. I think that would be kind of ludicrous to say, but with some of the recent polling we've seen here, I think we can, very plausibly say it's going to be a bit closer than it's been in the past. Now, as far as Democrats, what are other silver linings? I think right now, the state of New Mexico and Colorado have been very consistently Democratic. And, despite despite Joe Biden having these challenges over the last couple of weeks, and if he were to stay as a nominee, I think, generally speaking, he's going to continue facing these challenges, especially when voters kind of start talking about age. And I think, the big thing this election is going to come down to, if Biden stays as a nominee. I think right now, Biden staying as a nominee is not such a sure thing. I think there's a lot of different possibilities of things that could happen. But if Biden stays as nominee, you're going to see states that I would have put the state of Colorado, the state of New Mexico, maybe even in the safe column, you know, a bit earlier in this election cycle. I mean, over the last couple of months, we've seen a lot of polls tightening, which once we get to a lot of our toss-up states, we're going to talk about the polls a bit more. But, you know, we've also seen this race really shift in a lot of different ways. We had a recent update by the Cook Political Report where they changed all the ratings that they changed, and it was a lot of them, and we're going to talk about them. A lot of the ratings that they did change, almost all of them were for Donald Trump or Donald Trump's favor. So, you know, with that, all that being said, you're seeing states that like New York or in New Mexico that potentially could have been in the safe column, slowly but surely moving you know, a little bit away from the Democrats. Now, and again, take this with a grain of salt. I don't think New York is going to be flipping anytime soon. I don't think, you know, New Mexico isn't going to necessarily flip anytime soon, but those are trends that need to be talked about, right? Also, in the state of Maine, I think things could potentially get a bit tighter than usual. I think definitely within that 15-point range. I don't think it's necessarily going to be, again, you know, Donald Trump's going to, you know, come super close to win the statewide electoral votes, but, you know, come a bit closer, I think, is really, you know, potential. Now, let's talk about the Republicans right now, what their, you know, likely states are. So, as far as likely states right now for the Republicans, I see them doing really well in Iowa. You know, they've consistently been doing well here, and I think, you know, with a lot of, you know, what's been going on with Biden, you know, that sort of buffer that they've had for the last couple of election cycles, regardless of all the issues, now I think gets a lot stronger. Then going to states like Ohio, you know, I think something that's interesting that's going to happen in the next couple of weeks is going to be Donald Trump's vice presidential pick. And you see, at the end of the day, vice presidential picks don't change much, but they might change at least a little bit. Right now, one of the favorites is J.D. Vance. If J.D. Vance is the vice presidential nominee, I could honestly see Ohio going by a bit more, but right now I would put it around 13, 14 points. And again, these are states that, generally speaking, were kind of in that, you know, kind of consistently Republican kind of phase. And, you know, Donald Trump has been able to expand the margin with all that's been going on with Joe Biden. Similarly, in the state of Florida, you know, the state of Florida is very interesting because, again, this was a state that was solidly a swing state. You know, for the last couple of election cycles, even so in 2020 a little bit, although Donald Trump expanded his margin in 2020, it's been very close. That's not the case anymore. In the state of Florida, the Republicans are now leading voter registration, like registered Democrats versus Republicans, by nearly 1 million voters. And you may think, well, that's just voter registration, which to a certain extent it is, but you know, historically, the Democrats have led voter registration in Florida, you know, going back before 2022. So I think the state of Florida is going to be, you know, probably when it comes to election nights, one of the states where you're going to mark that contrast. It's going to sort of feel like how the state of Ohio felt in 2016 and 2020, where you saw the state go by considerably larger margins that people were used to. And I think that's just speaking to the fact that, you know, Florida is no longer a swing state. I would say it's, you know, a likely Republican state at this point. And I think in the future, it's probably going to be one of the Republicans' biggest strongholds in the country. Now, all of this has been really affected by a couple of different factors. And I'm going to make a video just on the state of Florida because I think it's very interesting. And I'm from Florida, so I can give you a bit more of an insight of how some of the things on the ground are changing. But, you know, overall, I think for right now, those are going to be the likely states in this race. Moving on to the lean states. These are states that, you know, potentially could end up going, you know, by a slighter margin, but, you know, probably around the 5-6 point range, all the way down to like probably 2 points. Anything below 2 points, generally for me, if I think it's going to go less than 2 points, I start getting into that tilt column because you're starting to get into a margin of error. With that said, let's start off with the Democrats. So right now, I think the Democrats have some lean states. Right now, I would say Virginia is probably that 5 point range, potentially. New Hampshire, I think, is also potentially in that 5 point range. The second congressional district in Nebraska, I think, is in that 5-point range. And I think one thing that's common amongst all of these, states is the following, that these are states that the Democrats have pretty strong holds on. Now, New Hampshire, I do see a bit harder. I think it's probably to be out of all these states, the one that's like the furthest for the Democrats, just because Donald Trump is very unpopular here. And, even in an election cycle in 2022, when, Donald Trump and Joe Biden weren't technically on the ballot, but by virtue they were. You saw the very Trumpy candidates rather, in the state of New Hampshire lose a lot of support. And I think, for Joe Biden, that's something that's going to benefit him going into this race. The state of Virginia is trickling down a little bit. We do have a Republican governor in Glenn Youngkin here. Glenn Youngkin, again, he ran a very different campaign, a very distanced from Trump campaign back in 2021. But I think overall, it shows that there is some room for the Republicans in the state of Virginia. And, honestly, like, if you were to ask me who Donald Trump's best VP pick would be, or one of the best, out of the people that are left, I think, I kind of all have their flaws, but Glenn Youngkin would have been an exceptional pick, would have put the state of Virginia into play. But I still do think that the Democrats have, their solid foundation here. And Nebraska's second congressional district kind of has consistently gone for the Democrats over the last couple of years. It's a very urban district, so I do expect it still to hold on. Now, as for the Republicans, this is the biggest thing that has changed. A lot of those states that were maybe in the tilt column were kind of 2-point range, now have consistently seen polling in the 3, 4, 5, 6-point range. And those states are the state of Nevada, the state of Arizona, the state of Georgia, the state of North Carolina. At this point, I would go as far as saying Mays' second congressional district. I think these are all states that, as of right now, could be going by, very in that lean column. Let's just take a look at some of the polls. In Arizona, Donald Trump has consistently been leading Joe Biden by somewhere around 4 or 5 points. That I think is already kind of, with that consistency, puts it in the lean column for me. And, I think one of the big things that we're going to see is, generally speaking, I think the Sun Belt is going to go back to Donald Trump. States that he lost in 2020, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada, are going to go back to Trump. And, I think this specifically makes the electoral map so much more difficult for Biden. And like I kind of said at the beginning of the video, we have a clear leader in this presidential race, and it's Donald Trump. If you take a look at the race with 4 states still left to call, Donald Trump is only 1 electoral vote away from, being the leader and, winning the presidential election and reaching the 270 votes based on how I characterize the states right now. And, if this race was a toss-up, then at this point in the video where we're starting to get into our lean states, things would be, both candidates in the 230, 240 range, kind of coming down to those last 2 states. But Donald Trump's pathways to the White House are so expanded right now. He has so many different ways. And even if you suppose that he loses states like Arizona or Georgia, he can easily make them up in the Midwest. Joe Biden does not have, and if you look at the polls, he does not have the same, benefit. Like, let's take a look at the state of Nevada. In the state of Nevada, you could see, again, Trump leading by 5 points. Let's take a look at Georgia. Georgia, 5 points. So, we're almost getting to the point that if these trends continue up to Election Day and we don't see the tightening of polls in these states, I'm going to be honest with you, I could see these states going by 6, 7 points. Now, I think the severity and of Biden's situation as far as the concerns about his age go closer to Election Day, that's going to have a greater impact in these states. But I think the Sun Belt generally, and that's why states like Virginia could potentially end up flipping, have become a bit of a stronger hold for Donald Trump. Now, as always, and the story of this election cycle is and will always be what happens in the Midwest. Now, you see, the Midwest is very interesting because I think Donald Trump has a very interesting chance in some of these states. Now, the ground game is going to be the thing that's going to be the most important. And I think it really depends. I think that for the Democrats, one of the reasons that they shouldn't replace Biden is that even with all his issues about his age and stuff, I do think that he is one of the stronger candidates for the Midwest. I don't think Kamala Harris performs as well in the Midwest, when you compare her to Joe Biden. But again, Joe Biden is really old. But let's take a look at specific states, like I was saying. Minnesota. So in the state of Minnesota, 1.3 point lead for Biden. And I think that kind of holds consistent. I think the state of Minnesota is definitely a lot closer than a lot of pundits kind of will say. I think it's really in the same area of, potentially flipping as Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And let's be honest, if the Democrats do not win the state of Minnesota, I think you're already talking about a game over scenario. Now, what about the three other states in the Rust Belt? So, Michigan. The state of Michigan right now, as you can see in this polling average rather, has been really tight. We've saw some Bloomberg polls that have Biden up by a lot more, but you had a lot of polls, even some internal polls for the Democratic Party, be consistently in favor of Donald Trump. And I think right now, if I were to characterize it, I think it might be a slight Donald Trump victory, especially considering the concerns about Biden's age. In a lot of these states, we're going to have marginal elections, that are going to come down to 50,000 voters, 40,000 voters. Honestly, I think the concerns about Biden's age are going to be the deciding factor. And again, if there is a case for the Democrats to get rid of Biden as their nominee, it's this. A lot of these states are very, very close. And, one of the big arguments that's been said, especially by the Biden camp and the White House, has been, well, the polls really haven't changed. But the reality is that Donald Trump has consistently been leading in the polls over the last couple of months. So again, it's looking pretty bleak for the Democrats at this point. Last two states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, it doesn't really, of course it matters, but as far as the pathway to 270, Donald Trump already has what he needs based on my prediction. But, this could be something that, if we take a look at these polls, again, marginal leads for Trump by 1.5 points in Wisconsin. And if we take a look at Pennsylvania, last time I checked, it was the same thing. We were talking almost a 3-point lead in Pennsylvania. I think these kind of go easily for Donald Trump. I would even put Pennsylvania in the in the lean column as well. But, just because I think the ground game is also very interesting, and I think a lot of things can happen right now. I think this is sort of where we are at with the electoral map. Donald Trump at 312 electoral votes, Joe Biden at 226. Overall, what are the biggest takeaways from this updated electoral map? Number one, Joe Biden has definitely been weakened by his debate performance. The internal fighting within the Democratic Party has hurt him as their nominee. Second, I do think that Donald Trump is gaining strength in different parts of the country. But I think more than him gaining strength, it's really due to Joe Biden losing support. Because here's the thing. And I think this is something that we've talked about since Joe Biden won the presidency. And this was the same thing in 2020. Joe Biden doesn't have the amount of support that Donald Trump has of unconditional voters that are going to go out and vote for him regardless. We have to remember, Joe Biden won in 2020 because there was a couple of lifelong Republicans in several states who, held their breath and ended up going and voting for him. And these are not enthusiastic Biden supporters. And even within the Democratic Party, we have to remember the way that the Democratic primary went down in 2020, it was a lot of influence by the DNC. It was a lot of influence by, high operatives to orchestrate Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar to drop out of the race to give Biden that pathway. So there's not that excitement that exists anymore. And with Biden's age issues, it's not there. So when we look at the race right now, I think very bleak for the Democrats. Donald Trump, in my opinion right now, is the clear front runner for the White House. If you're, whether you like him or not, I think the numbers speak for themselves. And, one of the things with my channel is I try to keep everything really objective. And I think objectively right now, Donald Trump is the favorite to win the White House. We'll see what happens, and with Joe Biden, him dropping out, I'm going to be making my next video about that, actually, about what a Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump scenario will look like. But overall, there's still a lot to happen from here to November. So let's see what happens. I want to thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please give it a huge thumbs up, like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you're up to date with all of our latest content. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.